If you've seen my Marvel Rivals short and the breakdown of said short, you know I use Blender to render and heavily use Blender's compositing to get the look. Today, let's dive into that compositing setup. I'll take one of my shots from the short and I'll walk through each node so you can see how I achieved stylized compositing in Blender. Let's dive in. So here's one of my shots from the short. This is when Iron Man is flying in and Wolverine drops in behind. We're going to keep this still frame up and we'll just see how the compositing can impact that shot. Now right now I only have textures on, and if I just turn on the actual lighting and shading, you could see I only have one sunlight here. If I turn that off, it goes down. So I have my sun. I do have some fog here, so if I turn that off, that will come into play later. It's really only one directional light that's driving all of the light sources. So let's go back into my camera view, and now we can start looking at the compositing. So I have these in 3 different sections. This up here is Wolverine. This right here is Iron Man. This is our background, and then this is when we kind of bring it all together, add the mist, and then these are just like the final touches. So for the characters, we're gonna focus on Iron Man. Wolverine is pretty much the same exact setup. I just set one character up. Once I got that, I duplicated it, and I changed just a few small things as far as mats go. So I'm just gonna bring my output here, and let's turn on compositing. So I'm just going here in the viewport compositor, we'll change it to always, and you can see the look immediately that it gives us. This is the final look. So if we just look at Iron Man, this is the final look. So up top here, we're gonna look through this. I rendered out a crypto mat of Iron Man, and if we just look at the mat, you could see here is our cutout of him. And this is going to set our alpha for the final look, as well as play into creating some alpha-based rim lights. So starting off with the alpha-based rim light, I feed the mat into a translate, so it just moves it very slightly. So if you see this is translated, if we put it back original, just shifts slightly. We're subtracting our translate from our original mask, and that is going to give us our alpha-based rim. So if I move this, you can adjust it. If I move it up and down, you can adjust it to however you need. And if I just scroll through, this is how the rim sits. You might need to actually key that depending on your camera, but I didn't have to key that for a lot of what I did. Now I took that subtraction and I wound up just doing a blur node just to make it just a little bit softer. I didn't want it to be super hard line. Now after that blur, we did bring it into a set alpha. So this is just bringing this image, and I'm putting the original map because it did shift. So now our image is going to be slightly offset. Well, this is just going to trim it back to what originally was there. That way our rim light is not going to go past our character. This is just a way to clean that up. And then I fed that through a Kuwahara filter, just trying to get a little bit of painterly feel. It doesn't really change too much, but it gives just a little bit of something. Now, this black and white image is then used as a factor in a mix node. And let's look at what that mix node consists of. When I go through this stylized look, I'm not actually taking the image of the final render, where the light is actually affecting the geometry. I like to use that light info and feed it into the compositing tab via a mask, really. And I like to take the diffuse color, and then I can determine what color is the light, what color is the shadow, etc. So if we take a look here, that black and white mask that I was talking about is actually the shadow pass. So if you go to the render passes here, there's a shadow pass on the bottom. And the shadow pass is going to be exactly that. This is from the singular sunlight. So it's this black and white image. So that is fed through a Kuwahara filter just to give it a slight painterly feel. And then that is fed into the factor of a mix. And that mix node consists of the diffuse being multiplied by this kind of I guess like darkish blue and dark gray, bluish gray. And the other one is taking that diffuse and feeding it through a soft light. And this is just like a little bit of a yellow orangish kind of tint. So you see that. And now when we feed this through the mix, we have our shadow and our light. This is just giving us a basis for that. But you see that everything is showing up here. So we feed that through a set alpha again, and the matte is our alpha. That's from our crypto matte from earlier. So if we look at that, now we're isolated to just Iron Man. So moving back to where we were before, we had the Kuwahara, that was our factor. So this black and white image, I wanted the black to be my kind of lighting setup, and the white I want to be a nice color, but I didn't want it to be a solid color. I still wanted to try to keep some of that texture in there. So I fed the diffuse color again through a, this time, linear light. And this is a little bit more of a slightly tinted white. And you can see it looks terrible just on its own. But when you run it through the mix node, now we get that nice rim light. You still get very slight texture in there, so you can see right there, you just get it slightly. And one of the things that I'll say when you're trying to test out how does the shadow look, how does the light look, how does a rim light look, mess with different modes, different blending modes. Sometimes color dodge has been a great mode for me, sometimes linear light. Just play and see what feels right for your shot and for your project. Multiply does tend to be, I think, the best for shadows, so I always default to multiply. But I am willing to try things out and see what kind of results it will give me. So after that, we are running into another pass here. So this is using my normal pass. On a previous video, I walked through normal passes in the Arcane compositing kind of look. And normal passes could be great to simulate lighting after the fact without actually having lights. There's two different methods of how you can achieve this. This is one of them. I will actually show you the other one later because I used it in the environment. But this is a node that I set up. So if I double click this, all it is the image goes into, the image is our normal pass. Our normal pass goes into a separate color. We separate the color, red, green, blue. Then in our factor, these are the parameters in the node. So side to side is for red, up and down is for the blue, and then depth is red. So these are just little sliders that we can move to change it up and down, side to side, or forward and backwards. After that, we're just feeding each of these into an add. That way they all come back together. And then I just put that into a color amp, so we have like a true 0 to 1 kind of clamping it. So now we could go back up, and this is what that normal pass looks like. So this was just to get a little bit of light on the top. I, again, set alpha. That way we're only looking at Iron Man. And I ran that through a Kuwahara filter to get, again, that just slight painterly look. And this now is fed into another mix node. That is going to be our mask black and white image that we're telling black is this, white is this. So we have our image here. This is with our rim light and our lighting setup. I then did a darker tint here, and that is going to feed into here. So we're only just getting that initial lighting pass in the very top, and we're just getting another layer of a shadow. I just wanted to keep it just a little dark. I didn't want it to be too bright. Well, we have only one actual light source. I wanted to add a little bit more depth, and that's where normal passes can come in real handy. So after that, I fed that through a color adjust. This is just to bring up the exposure a little bit. We have that depth, but it was just a little too dark, so I brought it up slightly. I fed it through a glare node, and you can see I have the glare, and then I have the original image. That just went through a mix because I felt the glare was too much on its own. So I wanted to put it just into a mix node so I can tone it back or put it up if I needed to. So 0.5 was good for that. And then the next step was getting the emission of his reactor. So I actually did an emission pass. This was set up in the shader where the texture actually had an emission map. So the emit pass just looks like this. That went into a sunbeams. As you can see here, sunbeams kind of gives just that cool perspective, kind of almost shift. I did limit that down though, because if you go to 1, it's crazy. So I did 0.01. And you can move this around, so this will show it more when it's like this. So if you need it more on the left, more on the right, that helps if you're looking for a certain kind of effect. And then just fed that through a soft glow. Once again, set that into a set alpha and put that into a glare of its own. And then I just added that together. So the add function in mix node, the add just allows you to place this on top. If you have a black image, the black will feed through and this will just kind of sit on top. So when we have this image and this image, when we add it together, we have that. And that is essentially our final look of Iron Man. Now for Wolverine, we could look at him. It's pretty much the same exact setup. We have our matte and everything here, our rim light, our lighting setup. I really set up Iron Man first and then just duplicated it. And all I did was just put in a new crypto matte and put Wolverine in the crypto matte. And that just allowed me to have him as the mask. So now let's look at our environment. There's a few different things going on here. So let's start at the top. This is what I was saying, the other form of using the normal pass. This is a normal node. So if you just type normal, it's vector normal. And this brings this in. So you could feed your normal pass right in there. So the normal pass, you could just move this around, which is pretty cool. It gets a little finicky sometimes. So that's why the other method is sometimes a little better to achieve a specific look that you're going for. But sometimes the vector normal is pretty good. That feeds into a color ramp. It's not changing anything. This is just, again, giving that 0 to 1 value. So as it feeds through Kuwahara and a factor, it works properly. Because sometimes if you don't do that, it doesn't work properly. So we feed that through a Kuwahara. And it's pretty blurry, but we're just looking for a nice overall look. We don't need anything too detailed. So that's going to feed into a mix node here. And let's look at what is going to be driven by that factor. So the first one I used was actually the image. I used the normal lighting coming from the image. And I fed that through a color dodge. So this is just to give it a slight highlight. So that's going to be one. That's going to be our highlights. And then the next pass was using the shadow pass again. So that shadow pass from earlier, if we just look at it again, we have all of our shadow. And that fed into another Kuwahara. And that was fed into the factor of a mix node. So what's feeding through that is the image goes through a multiply. So this is feeding through a factor, and you could dial it in and you can mess with it after, but I guess I turned it to 0 for the shot, maybe because it didn't need to be that dark, but it's there if we needed it. Then I fed that image again through a color adjust. I forgot to mention, this color adjust is from something called Uber Compositor. Uber Compositor is an add-on that I got off the Blender Marketplace. I really like it. It has some great stuff. It has like a nice film grain, dreamy kind of feel. It has lens flares, color adjust. You don't need it. You can use other nodes to color adjust, but I just found it really nice, so that's what I'm using. So that color adjust feeds through here. So if we just look at our image, that's our normal image. This is just giving a little bit of a brighter feel. And if we look at that, our Kuwahara filter, our darkness, you can see how dark it kind of gets, but I didn't want it to be too dark there. And then that feeds into our previous mix node. So again, this is our factor. This was our color dodge. And if we look at the final, just compared, you just get a nice little bit of a hint. of like a rim light. We're not really doing anything too drastic here, but it just gives a nice layer of depth. So again, before and after. Now next up, this is going to be an alpha over. The sky in the background was giving me some weird texture like shadow lines and stuff from the sunlight. So I actually created an AOV output in the shader itself for the sky, and I just named it sky. So if we take a look at that, you'll see just the sky in the background, and it's just that color. I wanted it to be flat. I wanted it to be bright. So I ran that through a color adjust, and that really brought up the exposure and just made it nice and popped over. But because of the AOV output, all of this is an alpha. So I just did an alpha over, putting in this color adjust and this, and you'll see now we have the sky in the background. Now we're almost done with the background. The next step that I did was a mist pass. A mist pass is basically just a very basic fog pass, and you can adjust it a couple different ways. You can go into the world settings and go to mist pass, and you can start it at a certain depth, and you can say how far it goes back. Also, you can run this through a color ramp and mess with it that way. There's a couple different things that you could do with mist pass, and it's pretty cool. So I kept it pretty simple though. I did the mist pass, I adjusted it here a little bit, or I just liked how it was, and that gives me a black and white image that I can add on top of my previous output. So my mist pass, here's my environment, and then I added it together. Now it might be like this. If you're at 1, it's really bright. We don't want that. We just wanted it subtly there. So I brought it down to a 0.2. So we just get a little bit of depth, because otherwise here, everything feels almost the same value. And we don't want things to always have the same value. You want certain things to pop out, and the best way to do that is to, sometimes you can just, it's like a camera when something's overexposed, the overexposed background, but you're perfectly exposed for something that's closer in the near foreground. So this just allows us to really just soften the background and allow our characters to then pop. So if we run that, I just ran it through another color adjust, but I thought it was maybe just a little too bright. So I actually brought the exposure down just slightly, because this was 1, and I just brought it to a 0.8. And now we can start to bring these together. These are just alpha overs, bringing in Iron Man and the background, and then feeding that with Wolverine in the background. So the alpha over here is this output. We have Iron Man in front now. Wolverine is still there, and we can just bring that alpha over. It's pretty simple, just a way to bring all of it together. Now, next step is just the last step of volumetrics. I mentioned before that I had easy fog in my scene. And if we look at this, I'm just kicking out, it's called the volume directional. So this is just a render pass volume light, and that's the volume directional. So let's take a look at that. And we get some really cool textured fog. Easy fog is a great little add-on. I think it's like you can add planes, but you can also add actual volume cubes, and that's what that is. So if we look, that's the volume cube overall. It's really cool, adds a lot of depth. I'm always looking, how can you add depth to your scene? That way everything isn't too flat and too even. So I decided to take that and I ran it through a Kuwahara just to, again, give that little painterly feel. So this is pretty cool, because if we look at the original, it's very detailed, more what you standardly will think a fog, but you could just run that through a Kuwahara and you just get some kind of more splotches and blocky splotches. It's pretty cool. Something I failed to mention earlier on, but in the Kuwahara, I always do anisotropic. I don't really do classic. I like the anisotropic look. And because this gives us an image of this color and just black, we can run it through an add node. And if we run that through, this is our original, and this is through the add. And again, I didn't want to blow out the background too much or just add too much, because if I go like full 1, it seems like a lot to me. So I did just keep it at a 0.15, something to subtly add to it. And also just to showcase, one last thing to show with the volume light pass, It does have a color when you bring it in, and I can change it there. But if you want to change the color, you can actually do a color ramp, feed that through. Now it's black and white, and you can just change this color to whatever color you need. So if I wanted it super blue now, there we go. So it's pretty cool. We don't need to do that. I just wanted to showcase that you could change the color if you needed to. Now that we have our whole basic image set up, these are just the final touches now that we can layer in. I found this setup somewhere online. I forgot who it was, but depth of field is big for me. It's something that I use a lot at work, and I just really want to always add it in. The way that the diffuse pass and everything works, it's sometimes a little tough. So I ran a depth pass, and you run that through a subtract, and the subtract value allows us to move this in and out, which is awesome. And when we run that through an absolute, this just gives it almost just gives it like a clamp feel. But we can run that through a defocus in the Z section, and now if we feed our image into here, now we have depth of field, and you could change the max blur to something crazy. You could go 8, you could go 1, you could go crazy with it. I like 3. It was enough that I could tell that there was bokeh and there was a depth of field, but it wasn't enough that it was like, what am I looking at back there? It's not a super long lens. So if it's a super long lens, then something like an 8 makes more sense. But wider lenses tend to not have the f-stop for that. So after the defocus node, I ran it through something called an add compression artifact. This is not something that I made. This is something that I found online. It was from, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Nagi. This is on his Patreon. It is available for purchase. It was a project where he recreated a scene from Spirited Away, and it is awesome. Everybody should definitely go check it out. But you could get the project, and it actually has a custom like Behance compositor filter, which is this, and there was one other, but I just tend to use the compression artifacts. So if we run that through, you can see it just kind of dirties it up a little bit. Sometimes CG 3D stuff is just a little too clean cut. So finding a way to add that little bit back, that warmth and that texture, is huge. So I ran it through the compression artifacts, and then I ran it through 2 nodes from the Uber Compositor add-on. That was film grain, again, just adding in that warmth and natural feel. And then I ran that through a vignette, and that's just to give just a little bit on the outside. It's nothing too major, it's very subtle, but just something to hone our eye in just a little bit in more. That's my whole compositing setup.